Hello and welcome to The Bottom Line on TVP World. This is where we unpack some of the main business and economic stories of the day. I'm your host, Marie Cato. There was a margin of hope that the EU and the US would work out a deal to avoid the escalating tariffs and trade tensions. Given this week's announcement from Donald Trump, on top of everything else, April the 2nd will bring a torrent of new tariffs on European goods, including a 25% duty on cars. But before we get into the details, let's bring in some context with Jan Kennedy's feature report.
Europe's automotive industry, already struggling in recent years, has suffered yet another major setback.
And what we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States.
The news sparked a negative reaction from the markets, with global automotive shares, including those in the US, plummeting.
How it will exactly play out is unclear, because we don't know whether the demand in the US will really come down or whether US consumers are able to or willing to pay a higher price for European cars, or whether it is the European car manufacturers that will see their profit margins shrinking.
The negative effects will spill over to Central and Eastern European countries, which supply key automotive components to Germany.
Central and Eastern Europe is not only a major car producer, but also a major component producer. And in fact, here, this could be a really major impact in terms of exports to the US.
Analysts estimate that the economies of the Czech Republic, Hungary, Slovakia, Slovenia and Romania could shrink by 0.5% of GDP. Poland, while a major exporter, is less dependent on car exports. The news follows Washington's earlier tariff announcements, which targeted aluminium and steel imports, which are said to affect Europe indirectly.
Donald Trump imposed tariffs on steel worldwide, not just on the European Union. Countries that were previously exporting to the US, such as Turkey, India, South Korea and Japan, now face restricted access to the US market. These countries will look for alternative markets, and the European Union will be a primary target.
But that's not all. EU Trade Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič has reportedly said that he expects Washington to impose 20 to 25% tariffs on all EU imports on top of the existing ones, in what the US calls reciprocal tariffs.
The effect would be seen on the producers as well as consumer side. So with regards to the import of goods to European market from the US, that would be very clearly seen that the prices would raise, and in the long term probably the demand would drop.
So far, the EU has struggled to respond decisively, delaying a planned €26 billion retaliation package. However, more clarity is expected on April 2nd, which Trump has called Liberation Day.
It looks as if the European Commission will then want to present a full package of retaliation. Whether this will be blanket tariffs, so across the board on all US goods, or whether it will be more specific, remains unclear.
As European companies assess the potential impact the tariffs may have, they're facing a critical question: how to adapt.
I do believe that it would be pretty strong effect in inflow of FDI from Europe. The question is if these European companies would be willing to invest within the economy, which is still, not very clear in terms of the economic policy.
For the time being, one thing is certain: European businesses should brace for impact.
So today we want to explore the escalating tariff wars, not just at the European level. We want to specifically understand the Polish government's perspective. Europe is on the cusp of challenging trade relations with the US. Today I'm pleased to welcome Michał Baranowski, Deputy Minister at the Polish Ministry of Economic Development and Technology, to share the Polish perspective. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us at the studio.
It's great to be with you.
So, when we first heard of Trump tariffs heading towards Poland, experts were rather relaxed about their impact in this region. But weeks later, the narrative has slightly changed. How do you feel about the tariffs coming to Poland? This week's announcement, Commissioner Šefčovič's rather unsuccessful negotiations in Washington. Let's bring this all together, and I'd like to hear about how you feel about all this.
So there are a few perspectives that we have to analyze from Polish point of view. On one hand, of course, we are very much plugged in and therefore impacted by the tariffs. On the other hand, we also have the role of the EU Council presidency, where we work very closely with Commissioner Šefčovič. In fact, we are on the phone or on video with him every week or so. You said that he was unsuccessful. He was unsuccessful, like the rest of the world, in convincing our American allies that this is a better idea, not only for Europe, but very much for the American consumers and producers for the moment, because tariffs on cars that President Trump announced is something that will hit, first of all, the American consumers that will pay much more for their cars. The American cars are being produced between Canada and the US, Mexico and the US, so he's taxing his own people. Will it impact Europe? Absolutely. Will it impact us as well? Yes, indirectly, because we export through Germany, through Italy, both parts, and are part of the supply chain of the cars. But again, for also our American colleagues, to understand that this is something that will hurt them first, unfortunately.
So exactly 1 month ago, Polish Prime Minister Tusk said that the US tariffs on the EU would reduce Polish GDP by 0.1%. A month later, would you say that the estimates have changed? Has the Polish government updated its forecasts? Because now we know a little bit more about what is coming our way.
So we are updating our forecast on an ongoing basis. We have had the analysis before President announced any tariffs. We are updating them. And let me try to point to two sort of effects that are happening that make those forecasts a little bit unpredictable. Because on one hand, when the US imposes tariffs, it impacts our trade partners. It lowers the overall economic activity within Europe. That's bad for Poland. On the other hand, some tariffs allow us, including Poland, to fill some of the voids within the European market, also because Europe will impose tariffs on the United States. So the net effect is not, first of all, a little bit hard to estimate at this moment. We are working on those models, and it might not be that negative, though this is certainly not something that we are welcoming either as the Polish government or as Europe overall.
How soon do you think you might have updated forecasts?
Well, honestly, so I tasked my team. We wake up every day, read FT, read Twitter, actually we don't read the whatever the...
Surely you watch our channel as well.
Well, that's true. No, but it's basically we look at what President Trump tweeted or put on social media at the moment, and we look to the analysis that we already prepared, and we produce new ones. So we'll have a good guess of what will come on April 2nd, because that's the day that even those tariffs that Commissioner Šefčovič talked about, or the car tariffs, they will all come on April 2nd. But to some extent, this is going to be a surprise because the American side have not very clearly communicated what will come in. So I will have first analysis of it this coming Monday.
Okay.
In order to prepare, so the Prime Minister, so my minister can give a pretty good estimates right as these tariffs come in based on which of the scenarios that we predicted will actually come to fruition.
Do you think that GDP forecast of 3.9% or even higher, do you think that will be safe?
3.9%. Oh, in terms of growth.
Yeah.
That is a good question that I'm not ready to answer.
That's fair enough.
I think Poland is very much indirectly affected by the tariffs. So I think I would be in a safe place to say that we'll continue to be the fastest growing economy in the EU. Now, overall decline in GDP dynamic in the EU will not be good for us, but there are also other countervailing forces, including big infrastructure, big defense spending that are coming at the same time as the tariffs. So it's a little bit hard to know which of those factors will prevail.
Sure. Poland's trade with the US perhaps is not all that significant in the sense that the import and the export brought together is approximately 3%, but the share of EU trade with the US is about 20%. So that's quite significant. And surely that will impact Poland in more than one way. And obviously the countries in this region are impacted by the car manufacturing industry in Germany, and a lot of the countries in this region will be impacted in more ways than one. And if we look at the figures, last year Germany exported 3.4 million cars to the US, 135 billion euros. So obviously that means a lot to us in the region. So can you give us some comments as to how, given this week's announcement, that might impact people who work in the car industry, for instance? I mean,
well, as the material, or as this video before our conversation pointed out, Polish economy is more diversified than some of our regional partners, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, few others. But it will be impactful. It will be impactful because we have frankly not seen such high tariffs, ever before on automotive industry. The viewers probably know that right now US tariff on cars is 2.5%, so it's a very large hike. Now, important piece, but not critical. So, whether I don't want to point to a very specific number, especially as we are still cranking those analyses. Again, not good at all, but not a killer for our economy. Our impact is through Germany. It is also through France, through Italy, and other big industrialized economies in the EU. Now, car tariffs are just part of this story. The piece that I'm watching, and frankly that we are all watching and are somewhat worried a little bit more, is the piece about so-called reciprocal tariffs. More broadly, we wonder what will the American administration, and in the end President Trump, who seems to be the ultimate decider on this, what they will think of, what methodology they will use, because some of the proposals that we are seeing seem to be pretty, let me put it, outrageous in terms of including some of the standards that Europe is using. VAT was talked about by the US administration as a tariff. So a lot of, for the non-expert viewers, so to say, very much non-tariff measures are potentially seen by American administration as a trade impediment, which make that April 2nd a very big, unpredictable date.
I wanted to ask you now to sort of step out of this EU structure, which might be a little bit difficult, but I wanted to ask you about the Polish government's position regarding the response, because obviously a response is inevitable, retaliation of some sorts. It has to be strategic. Is Poland going to push for a hard response or a softer one? Okay, so that's a hard question, because I don't know if that's the best place to communicate our our position on a major TV, and especially from a position of EU Council presidency. A few things that I can say. We'll aim both as a country and as presidency for keeping unity. And that's really, I don't mean it just to sort of easily answer your question, but it is not about whether we are hard or soft. It is that we are united. Europe has a single trade policy, and in that field, we are really a superpower. And we are a superpower as long as we can preserve this. Now,
it's probably true that we as a union, again, will not be treated seriously by our American partners if we just fold and don't do anything. Now, I do expect a response. Now, within the EU, because it's a Commission's prerogative, we don't necessarily vote on this. So this is a way for me to avoid your question of what will be our position. We are certainly not the country that is the most outspoken in criticizing and sort of punching back in rhetorical way. There are some other ones that go a little bit further on this. But again, I think that the consensus that I'm seeing is that we will have to have a response that is proportional, that is serious, that frankly takes us to a negotiating table with our American partners, where we, and frankly, the negotiations should be happening before the first shot are taken, but it seems like the first shots will be taken before the parties sit down to have a talk.
So as a government, you think that the negotiations haven't been handled in the best way possible?
Well, again, let me be precise, but a little bit diplomatic. They have not been, the American partners have not been as forthcoming in what they would like to see in terms of sector by sector negotiations, besides the sort of pre-blanket statement that we have imbalanced trade relationship. And that the imbalanced trade relationship is true only if you look at goods, if you look at products, where US has a deficit. We, as Europe, import much more of services from the US. And in fact, if you took those two pieces together, there is almost a perfect balance. It's a 3% off. So I wish we had much more of these negotiations, but I'm not criticizing our side. I am criticizing perhaps more the other side of the table. I wish we had much more of these conversations before the tariffs actually hit on April 2nd.
What do you think is the actual purpose of the tariffs? Obviously, we hear of Donald Trump talking about putting America first, strengthening the economy. But do you think it's entirely possible that the purpose in his mind is actually to weaken the EU?
So I actually don't think it's that part. I don't think that President Trump is trying to weaken anyone in particular. Again, those tariffs will hit everyone. It's not only vis-a-vis Europe. We often wonder what is exactly the reason and the mechanism. The American side talks about bringing manufacturing to the US. That's one reason. Raising a lot of money, and so I think the US has this internal revenue system for taxes. They want to create something that is called external revenue service. Now, it is yet to be proven whether these tariffs bring any money or whether they actually cost enough to lower tax receipts for Americans. I think it's a mix. I think it's also more generally a response to the voters of especially this administration that feel that globalization has not been good for them and that the free trade has not been good for them, and therefore the administration feels like they have to do something. I'm just not sure if this something will work so well for American consumers, and certainly is not good for everyone else in the world as well.
Do you think there's any chance of a deal being struck in the near future?
I would be surprised if it's struck before April 2nd. Very surprised, very positively surprised. We'll open a couple champagnes. But we are planning for a scenario in which they happen. And on April 7th, we will convene trade ministers of Europe in Luxembourg to discuss what happened and what we do next. And that's our role also as the presidency of the Council.
Okay, Michał Baranowski, Deputy Minister of the Polish Ministry of Economic Development and Technology. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And that brings us to the end of The Bottom Line today. I was your host, Marie Cato. Join us every weekday afternoon at 5:10 CT on TVP World. And for the latest in regional business, follow us on X and on tvpworld.com. And for more news and analysis, stay with us on TVP World. Goodbye.